What's up, ladies and non-ladies? That's right. I did what every Yu-Gi-Oh player fears most. I read the cards. So with the new set coming out, Duelist Nexus, the sneak peek is going to be in a few days, this coming up weekend. And I realize that I'm going to be busy that weekend, so much like the last one, I'm not going to be able to go to the sneak peek. But unlike the last one, that's not going to stop me from making a video going over every card in the set and letting you know what is and isn't going to be good at the sneak peek. Now, if you're wondering what that's in reference to, I recorded an entire hour-over long video talking about Cyberstorm Access and all the cards that are in that set and how good they are in the sneak peek format specifically. In order to make this a little bit more accessible to people other than the people that care about the sneak peek, we're going to be talking about the cards in this set, yes, in the context of a sneak peek format, but also in the context of the greater Yu-Gi-Oh format. And we're going to start by talking about them in the context of the greater Yu-Gi-Oh format, because I know that's what most of you are here for. Now, to begin, I have grouped them together in a way that may not make a whole lot of sense, but it makes a lot of sense if the point of this video is to talk more so about the sneak peek format, because I've grouped them together by rarity. And rarity is one of the most important things you have to consider when thinking about the sneak peek format. We'll talk more about that after we get to the initial talk through of the set. So let's go ahead and do that first. Starting off, we're going to talk about the cards, and by that I mean card, that is exclusive to the Quarter Century Secret Rare. And that card is, of course, Magicians of Bond and Unity, set number 000. Now, whether you're talking about normal TCG or the sneak peek format, this card is a load of butt. It requires you to have 25 or more cards in your graveyard in order to special summon it. Now, in the normal TCG, that's not the most unheard of thing you could possibly do, but in terms of level 8 extenders, this is not one of the better ones. Most decks that want level 8s have much better level 8s that they could be playing. And the fact that this is a spellcaster doesn't really do much for it. And the fact that the only upside to this card is the gaining attack, which requires your opponent to also have 25 or more cards in their graveyard, means that in order to summon this thing, you have to have already comboed off extensively. And in order to get the upside, your opponent has to have comboed off extensively. Now, that may not sound like the worst thing in the world. I mean, you know, most Yu-Gi-Oh decks are combo decks, and that doesn't seem unheard of to be able to accomplish. The problem is that if you're in that position, this card is not going to win you a game. It's at most going to give you an extra body on the field, but there's plenty of other monsters with more advantageous typing, stats, and levels that could very easily win you the game on the spot. Now, moving on, let's talk about the secret rares. Let's talk about, honestly, the most anticipated secret rare in the set, and that's Revolution Synchron, set number 002. This card's crazy as it functions as material in hand and then reborns itself to be added as extra material, meaning that it essentially allows you to go functionally +2 in terms of the material you have on board. It's only really a +1 in terms of true card advantage, but the fact that it allows you to synchro summon using it from hand and it's a tuner means that you can have any sort of non-tuner on field and use it as the part of the materials. And the fact that it says Power Tool Synchro Monster means that it can be used to summon more than just the original Power Tool. And the fact that the level 7 or higher Synchro Monster isn't specific to dragons like the first effect is, means that it's also playable in decks that don't even play dragon synchros, assuming that you want this in the grave and don't necessarily want it in your hand. The only downside is that the second effect can only be used once per duel, which is a silly restriction. I know that that's what was on Glow Up Bulb as well, but, you know, I really don't think that's a restriction that needs to be there. If the game's going more than one turn anyway, I mean, getting an extra body on field is not going to mean the difference between winning and losing the game, and it can really help in a long grind game. But overall, this card is absolutely ridiculous, and I expect this card to be an absurd amount of money on presale. Now, the next card is a card that has me interested, but only purely from an aesthetics point of view. This is Nightmare Magician, arguably the worst secret rare in the set. This card is very bad. And its biggest sin is just not having very many effects that work with its own typing. It's part of the new illusionist archetype, or type, I guess. And all of its effects are battle centric. And yes, a lot of the illusionist monsters have a clause where they can't be destroyed and they can't destroy monsters by battle. But the fact that it has, a steal effect if you battle a monster, and the fact that, if another monster battles, it can pop a card. That's not really a lot. It can't summon itself. It's a 2 tribute monster, and it's a 2 tribute monster with only 2,500 attack. You could theoretically cheat it out through various means, but there's absolutely 0% chance that you would ever want to see this card in a deck. Even in a dedicated illusionist deck, it just doesn't have any synergy with any other members of its type. And this type is very new, very unexplored so far, so maybe there will come a time where playing this is worth it, but only if it's in a situation like with Red Eyes Fusion, playing Red Eyes and Dark Magician as Garnets. I can't imagine this card being played on its own merits. Now, next up, we're talking about the new Runic. Now, this is a level 9 Runic Fusion. It's a very interesting card for a lot of reasons. The first reason being that it's removal, apparently, and it's a quick effect. It's like Farfa's a monster as a quick effect, which is interesting. And it also allows you to summon a token if your opponent adds. But ultimately, I can't see this card being played in the Runic deck. It doesn't really do anything for the archetype. Like, you're not looking for interruption. You're looking for material in order to, search for other Runic cards and further gain advantage. And the fact that it's a level 9 means that the only real reason this card's ever going to see play is if people suddenly decide to start playing Runic cards in a generator deck, which, maybe Dyer will get right on that now that this card's out, but I can't see that being anything other than just like a gimmick. Now, Crimson Dragon is interesting because it's the card from the 5Ds anime. I've never watched the 5Ds anime, but I've heard other people talk about how it's really cool that this card has finally been printed. But the actual effect that it has is pretty underwhelming. The only reason you would ever play it is because it seems like they're trying to print a lot of very powerful support that can summon this for free. So, the fact that it searches a card that mentions itself on summon means that you can get access to some pretty cool cards. But overall, I would say it's probably not worth your time unless those other cards really help you and you have, flex slots in the extra. Now, of course, as is tradition in this era of Yu-Gi-Oh!, we have yet more Vsauce lore cards. This is the first of them that we're going to talk about. It's a level 8 synchro. Interestingly enough, it is one of the few synchros that can be summoned using exclusively tuners, as the secondary part of the materials list does not list non-tuner. It just lists one light monster. Now, this card treats itself as Vsauce while it's on the field. And when it's synchro summoned, you can add a spell trap that mentions Vsauce. And then during the main phase, you can destroy a monster you control. And then for the rest of the turn, all synchros gain 800, which seems like a cool sort of OTK tool. But the Vsauce archetypes don't really synchro summon very much unless you're exclusively Monadium. And even then, I don't anticipate you'll have very many synchros on the field. And gaining attack is just not something you really want to do, especially if it costs you a monster on board. The fact that it searches a Vsauce Speller Trap is cool, and that alone will probably make it worth playing to some people. But man, that secondary effect is just, it doesn't do much for me. Now we're going to get into something that I think is one of the most interesting decisions Konami made in this set, and that was introducing more evil cards. This is the new Evil Czar Xyz, a rank 6 dragon. This one, unlike some other Evil Czars, is actually entirely generic, meaning you can use any 2 level 6s. And if it has material, it can't be targeted by monster effects. And when your opponent activates a card or effect, you can detach 2 materials from this card and then target a face-up card they control and negate its effects until the end of the turn. And if all materials attached to this card are reptile and or dinosaur, you can activate this effect by detaching 1 material instead of 2. So while it doesn't require reptiles or dinosaurs as material, you do get an upside if its materials are only reptiles or dinosaurs. Sort of like how the Rika rank 8 is a quick effect if it's got a plant attached as material. So that's really neat, and this effect is actually kind of nice. So I can see this card maybe seeing play in decks that can go into a rank 6. It's a cool little negate, and the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to target the thing that activated is also cool. So I can see this seeing play. Dark Corridor is one of the more hyped secret rares from this set, and I'm honestly not entirely sure why. It doesn't seem all that crazy. I mean, it does add consistency to the Dark World deck, but the issue with the Dark World deck was never that it wasn't consistent. It was more so that it's a bit of a glass cannon. I don't necessarily think Dark Corridor is going to break Dark World anytime soon. It does make it where you don't have to play quite as many awkward consistency tools. 3 copies of this means that you suddenly have a lot more consistent access to a lot of your more powerful Dark World plays, being able to tutor for a Dark World and then either discard what you added or discard something else depending on what you had in your hand. It's a very cool card, and I think it's definitely going to see play in Dark World, but it's not going to propel Dark World to top tier anytime soon. Now, this card is bad. It's cool. I like it. As a concept, it is one of the coolest ways to remove something from the field I've ever seen. Monster removal of this kind is extremely niche, and I think that this may open the doors for similar types of removal to be used in archetypes that care about monsters being treated as back row, but put it on a card that actually has upside. As it stands, this is just an extremely interesting card that could maybe see play in like cubes and stuff, but for the most part, it's pretty underwhelming for the TCG as a whole. Now this card has me thinking, because this is trade-in for level 10s. Now you can send cards whose total levels equal 10, but in order to get max value out of this, you really want to send 1 monster. So ultimately, this card is only ever going to see true play, in my opinion, in a dedicated level 10 strategy. This honestly doesn't give me hope that it's going to see play, but if there's a deck that has level 10s and wants its level 10s in the grave, or just wants more consistency and draw power, I can see this card seeing play. The fact that the one that was printed for level 9s doesn't see play in like Generator leads me to believe that this probably won't see a lot of play, but it's definitely a card to keep an eye out on. Now, this is the new archetype, Tistina. A lot of people have been comparing it to Adamancipator just based on aesthetics, but after reading through the whole set and reading all the cards, it's nothing like Adamancipator. They don't have any extra deck bosses. All the bosses are main deck bosses, and it really feels incomplete. It feels like we're waiting for like a couple more waves of support for this deck to really become its own thing. But this is an extremely cool archetype for Limited, especially the sneak peek format, as there are tools in this set that make this archetype extremely usable, even without needing to pull some of the secrets and ultras. But if we're looking at the archetype as a whole for the implications in the TCG specifically, this card is really strong. It can be tutored out of the deck using cards later on in the list. And all of the little guys want light Tistina monsters on the field. So this card acts as a way to sort of get the better effects from a lot of those monsters. And it also has effects that can like set everything face down and then send whatever's left over still face up to the graveyard, which is cool because it sort of iterates on the idea of Book of Eclipse, making it where, if any monsters were left face up, then, they get sent to the graveyard. So pretty much the whole field is dealt with, which is nice. And now that we've talked about the secret rares, let's go ahead and move on to the ultra rares. Starting us off, we're going to talk about... I love Hita so much. For those that don't know, Hita is my favorite monster, Familiar Possessed Hita. It was my favorite card as a kid, and even as I've grown up, I've still just loved this card so much. And the fact that they finally printed the channeler version of her makes me very happy. Now, is this card good? Absolutely not. But I think that for any deck that has fires and is okay with its cards going to the grave, I think this card could definitely see play. I think I'm going to try it in Salamangreat, see how it goes. So maybe be looking out on the channel for that. Overall, though, it's a really cool series of cards that all have sort of an attributal generic search type of effect where you send itself and a card that matches its attribute to add another monster of the same attribute. Put on Do Not Disturb. That being said, this card's probably not going to see very much high-level play. Now, they released a new Makonko card. I read some of the Makonko cards, but I don't really know what the deck does overall. This card's interesting, though, as it's a very niche form of removal. The issue is that once you've actually summoned it, it doesn't really do anything. It's mostly, I think, just there to be sort of like a card that activates from the hand, equips, and then sends a card to the grave. So, well, it doesn't send it to the grave. It returns it to hand. But I think that this card is interesting. I don't know if it's going to see a spot in the actual Makonko deck, as I think a lot of the cards in that deck are pretty strong, and this probably doesn't reach to that level. But I'd be interested to see if people experiment with it. Next up, we're going to talk more about sort of the illusionist adjacent cards. This isn't an illusionist monster, but it's part of the first archetype printed for illusionists, which is the Chimera Fusion archetype. It works with Baphomet, Gazelle, King of Mythical Beast, and Chimera, the Flying Mythical Beast. Now, the fusions treat themselves as Chimera, and the main deck monsters are named after Baphomet and Gazelle and a few other things, but for the most part, they all try to work together. The goal is to get access to Chimera Fusion and then fusion summon using the monsters within the archetype to fusion summon one of the fusion monsters that treats itself as Chimera, the Flying Mythical Beast. A lot of the sort of consistency tools, the cards that, allow you to search the other parts of the archetype, also offer interruption from the grave. And the monsters that offer searching for the fusion specifically and the other types of monsters opposite of itself, those cards tend to float when they're used as fusion material. Now, unlike a lot of other fusion decks printed recently, like branded, they don't have a Shadal fusion. Their in-archetype fusion is specifically designed to require you to use materials from hand and field, but all of the materials you're using are hypothetically going to float. So it sort of mitigates the card advantage loss that way. The problem is that a lot of the fusion monsters don't have very powerful effects on their own. You're relying on the small guys that tutor for other monsters in order to give you interaction. We'll sort of go over them later. But the fusion spell is not a once per turn, and it recurs itself back to hand, which that effect is a once per turn. So hypothetically, you can fusion summon more than once in a single turn, and if you have ways to recur it that don't involve its own effect to recur it, you can fusion summon, tons of times in a single turn. And a lot of these cards do want to be in the grave, so putting them there merely gives opportunities to just plus even more. I don't see this being a dedicated strategy on its own. I maybe see it being like a supplementary engine to try and like accrue advantage in a different deck that also wants to fusion summon. But I don't really know if there's a fusion deck that really wants to splash with these cards right now. I'm interested to see where this archetype goes because a lot of the design is really cool and I really like the way the cards look. Now we have another Quasar retrain. This is not a good card. I really don't think it's going to see any play. It's not even really worth talking about. It requires so much investment. You could maybe do like a build around deck to try and summon it, and it does work with other synchro monsters to try and accrue you more advantage, and it does have interesting effects, but unfortunately it's just a little short considering how much investment you have to put into summoning it. Now this set has a bunch of Infernoble cards, and this is one of the ultra rares. This one allows you to summon a card that mentions the level 9 Synchro or Horn of Oliphant from your deck to your hand, and it has an effect that lets you Foolish and banish itself in order to summon a roll-in from deck or extra deck. It's cool. It does offer some interesting plays. The cards in this set, I think, are going to require research on their own, sort of see how they work with other Infernoble cards. Unfortunately, my resident Infernoble player is currently on sabbatical from Yu-Gi-Oh! So I don't anticipate that anybody will be making a whole lot of interesting content about this deck in the near future, at least none that I'm going to be checking out. And so that may mean that I have to be the one that makes it. Who knows? But we'll see if I have time. Next up is the new Pearly Xyz. This is the Noir rank 2. Now, I don't know if this card's good in the Pearly deck. It may warrant a slot. I don't know. Just based solely off the fact that it works with Sleepy Memory. But more Pearly cards is not the worst thing in the world, as that deck kind of got hit on the ban list. It seems to still be one of the best decks in the room, but I'm not going to complain. It seems like an interesting deck, and this card seems like an interesting addition. One thing I am extremely excited about from this set is the new Altergeist support. It seems like they're trying really hard. One thing I'm really excited about from this set is the new Altergeist support. It seems like they're trying really hard to make it more of like a mid-range deck instead of just a straight control deck. This card is really strong. It lets you tutor for an Altergeist trap directly from deck. And it allows you to steal your opponent's monsters and have them treated as Altergeist monsters, allowing you to further link climb into your strong Altergeist boss monsters. And the fact that it has 3,000 attack is also extremely strong. So I can definitely see this card seeing heavy play in the Altergeist deck. Now, of course, like every deck, they had to print a Link 1 for Infernobles. But the weird thing about this is that the Link 1 specifically requires the level 9 Charles Synchro while it's equipped with an equip card. And it seems like a lot of the support in this set is just extremely convoluted. I think maybe there's a Lithium video talking about all of this support, and he shows some combos. So if you're interested in seeing some of that, maybe check out his video. But in the meantime, there's just a lot of words, and not a lot of them I care about. Next up, I know Distant Coder is going to be excited about this. They released a bunch of new Unchained cards. Starting off with the ultra rare Link 2, we have Unchained Soul, Lord of Yama. It allows you to add an Unchained monster from your deck or grave to your hand when it's special summoned. And if a card you control is destroyed by battle or card effects while it's in your grave, you can banish it and then summon a fiend from your hand or grave. Then you can destroy a card you control, which is cool. I think that this card offers something to the deck. I don't play Unchained, so I don't know exactly what it is. It is definitely a consistency booster. And the fact that it's generic to Fiends means that you could theoretically play something like Tour Guide into Tour Guide to go into this card to search one of your Unchained monsters and then, get access to your plays that way. But we'll have to see how people use this. Next up is another Infernoble card. They created another Infernoble Arms card. This card just lets you basically cycle it for another Infernoble Arms from deck, and then, if it was sent to the grave because it was equipped by a monster that was sent to the grave, then you can target a warrior that is in your banish or in the grave and add it to your hand. It's not the strongest thing in the world, but the fact that it basically exists as 3 extra copies of whatever Infernoble Arms you need is pretty interesting. And it immediately puts an equip in the grave so that you can use some of your powerful effects that need equips in the grave. So it might be worth playing. I don't know. I don't play this deck. This card is interesting because it doesn't support Infernobles specifically. It supports Nobles in general. The first effect is specific to Fire Warriors, but every other effect doesn't add the Infer to the part, so it can search any Noble Arms, and it can target any Noble Knight, so it's a little bit more generic for like the larger archetype, but it does have the final effect that's specific to Charles, so we'll have to see if this card even sees play, if it has a slot in the Infernoble deck. My guess is probably not. The deck doesn't really need consistency necessarily, I don't think, so we'll have to see. Now, this is a card that I was extremely excited for. If you want to see more about this card, go ahead and check out my other video where I talk about every target that exists in the game for this card. This opens the floodgates in terms of the types of monsters that you can summon from the extra deck for free, and it really increases the number of cards that are summonable without needing to jump through a bunch of hoops. The issue is that in order to play this card, you need to not only play the card you want to summon off of it, but you need to play a copy of a card that lists it as material, meaning that you're going to have a dead slot in your extra deck regardless. And the fact that it negates effects means that theoretically, yes, you can summon Naturia, Beast, and Barkion, but they're going to have their effects negated until long after it matters. So is that really worth it? I don't know. But it can tutor out a lot of very strong cards. The one that I think is the funniest is that because Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon is listed as a material on a fusion monster, you can summon Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon off of this card, which I think is pretty neat. Now for the Tistina light monster that's actually summonable. This one basically just summons itself if you control a Tistina card, and then lets you add a Tistina spell trap from your deck to your hand. This card is absurd for the deck. And during your opponent's turn, if you control Crystal God, you can do the whole flip everything face down and then send what's left face up to the grave. It's really strong. And the fact that the first effect doesn't require the Crystal God to be on the field means that this card's extremely easy to summon and enables a lot of your other Tistina cards to get their better effects. Very strong. The last card is the field spell for the Tistina archetype. This one lets you Foolish. And then if your opponent controls 3 or more face-up cards, it summons Crystal God from deck, which is absurd. And if that isn't good enough for you, it also lets you search. But that's only if it's destroyed. And it doesn't search at special summons. But still, this card's really strong. And like the first effect alone makes it worth playing. So that second effect is honestly just a bonus. Next up, we're going to talk about the super rares. The super rares are pretty all over the place. Let's go ahead and get started with another one of the Chimera Fusion monsters. Now, there's a few different types of them. There's this one and Big Winged Baphomet, which I'm showing on screen, but we'll get to it later. They both have 2 effects. The first of which is a on normal or special summon, and the second is what happens when they're used as fusion material. So the first effect of Gazelle is that when it's normal or special, you can add a level 5 Fiend or a Chimera Fusion from your deck to your hand. Now, this is one of the ways that you get access to Chimera Fusion, but because it lists Chimera Fusion, it also can be searched by other cards within the archetype. And when it's used as material, you can add an illusionist monster from your deck to your hand. So not only does it tutor for the fusion, but it also floats into an illusionist monster when you use it as fusion material. Baphomet, while being a level 5, there are ways to bring it out that don't involve just straight normal summoning it. So, if it's normal or special, you can add a level 4 beast, which Gazelle is a level 4 beast, and Baphomet is a level 5 fiend, so they search each other. Or you can add Chimera Fusion. But you cannot special summon from the extra deck for the rest of the turn except fusions. And if it's used as fusion material, you can target an illusionist in your grave, special summon it. So both of them float. This one, unfortunately, only reborns, so it's a little worse for the floating effect. And the first effect restricts you to only summoning fusions. But it's an extremely strong card to keep in the deck because it is, one of the materials needed for the fusion summon. So if you draw it, you can use it to fusion summon, which is very good. And then there's Mirror Sword Knight. This card is insane. As a quick effect, you can loan fire for a card that mentions Chimera Fusion. And there's no restrictions on, what level they have to be or anything. So you can summon Baphomet or Gazelle straight from the deck using this card. Like I said, you can tutor for them very easily. And I mentioned earlier that the little guys offer you interaction or interruption on your opponent's turn. Well, if your opponent activates a monster effect and you control Chimera the Flying Mythical Beast, which all the fusions treat themselves as Chimera the Mythical Beast. So if you control a fusion, you can quick effect, banish this card from the field or grave, and negate that effect. So you tribute it, summon from deck, do your whole fusion summon, and then once he's fusion summoned, this thing represents a negate. So this card is extremely powerful. Absolute staple 3 of. Now, there's a weird sort of series of cards in... Shut up. Holy shit. Shut the fuck up. You're so annoying. So there's a weird series of cards in this set. A bunch of dinos which seem to be retrains of older dinosaur cards. The first one we're going to talk about is Mighty Dino King Rex. This card, when it attacks and destroys a monster, can attack again that battle phase. And once per turn, except the turn it was summoned, you can target 2 monsters your opponent controls, destroy them. This isn't really going to do anything for the larger TCG format, but this card's an extremely powerful card in Limited, especially since it has 3200 attack. And there's a card in this set that allows you to search it, but we'll get to that. Next up is more of the Altergeist cards I'm excited for. If this card is added to your hand, except by drawing it, you can special summon it. So it's a free body. And if it's normal or special summoned, you can reborn an Altergeist from the grave in defense position, but it cannot activate its effects. Which basically means that it offers even more extension. So you can add it off of a monster or a spell or whatever, and then summon it, reborn a guy from grave, and then you can link them off and continue your plays. Extremely powerful card. This card is not as good, but it still has its applications. It's basically the sort of counterpart to Meluseek. It has the effect that it can attack directly, and then it has an effect that it can activate when it inflicts damage. Unlike Meluseek being able to send a card, this card draws you a card. And if this card is sent from the field to the grave, you can Foolish an Altergeist card. Which, that includes spells and traps, so you could theoretically link it off and then send a trap to the grave in order to get its effect in the grave, or recur it back with one of your other Altergeist cards. So that's pretty cool. They also printed a new Monadium card. I don't really know what the Monadium archetype does. This card seems alright. I don't know. Another Infernoble card. So this one can banish from your hand or grave to special a level 4 or lower from your hand as a tuner. And if it's normal or special summon, you can target a level 4 or lower fire warrior in your grave and then reborn it. But you can't special summon it for the rest of the turn except warriors. So this card's decent. It can reborn as the first effect, which is alright. But being able to reborn off of a normal or special and the second effect is a little better, I think, because it basically gives you instant access to something like Isolde. But the fact is that the deck doesn't really need effects like this. If it's summoned from deck, that would make it a lot better, but the fact that it requires grave setup means that, you know, at that point you're probably already so washed with resources that you don't really need another guy to help you summon things. This card, I think, is a lot better as it basically summons itself for free if you control a monster equipped with a card. And it equips itself to a monster you control, meaning that you basically get added material for things like Charles and other such monsters. And it can also represent like an extra negate on like Immortal Phoenix Gearfried. So I think this card is probably the better of the two that I just mentioned. I think this card could theoretically see play, although I'm still a little iffy on whether that's even good or not. Now they released some new Nemlyria cards. I still don't know what this archetype does necessarily. I understand the basic concept. These cards do add some utility to the deck. This one specifically, summons itself and then allows you to add Dreaming Nemlyria, which I think is one of the stronger things you can be doing, especially in this deck where getting access to her is extremely important. Or it can Book of Moon something, which is decent. This card, I've been seeing a lot of talk about whether or not this is an inclusion in Drytron, as it can tutor for a Drytron Speller Trap. I think it's cool. I think it could very easily find a slot in a lot of people's Drytron decks, so definitely be looking out for this card. This card is bonkers. I wonder if this is going to be the beginning of a series of Monarchs that are like this, because in its summoning condition, it allows you to tribute it using an opponent's monster, which is unbelievable. And then it has a bunch of ridiculous clauses that all have bonus effects depending on what happened. I'm not going to go into all of them. The thing that's most interesting is the fact that it has a built-in summoning condition of being able to tribute your opponent's monsters. That would be a cool thing to see more of the Monarchs be retrained to have that. Here's another of the Chimera fusions. This one specifically requires Chimera the Flying Mythical Beast. So I believe this now makes Chimera the Flying Mythical Beast an armament target. So go ahead and retroactively add that to the video that I recommended you watch earlier. And the fact that it can be summoned using multiple materials means that you can get multiple attacks per battle phase, which is a good thing considering this card has so much attack. But it can't be destroyed, nor can it destroy anything by battle. But it does change the monster's attack to 0 and negate its effects. And the effect to attack multiple times does not limit you to one attack per monster. So you can attack it, reduce its attack to 0, and then attack the same monster again. And then if you have a third material, maybe attack it again and again and again up to the number of materials that it has. And the fact that it negates effects means that it does sort of deal with monsters on the field, and the negation is permanent, as is the attack reduction. So that's neat. Now, I've been seeing a lot of people hyping this card up as one of the pieces for Branded. It allows you to sort of recur your fusion spells, and it allows you to sort of use fusion spells in the grave as material for destroying cards your opponent controls. And it can also destroy things you control, but I don't see that coming up. It does seem cool, but I don't think it's strong enough to warrant a slot in Branded. Branded's extra deck is so tight, I can't really think of a world where you'd be jamming this thing in there. So they introduced another level 1 Ursarctic Synchro. This one is fine, I guess. Again, this is just more of them trying to introduce more floodgate effects to a deck that sucks. So I'm not super into this, but I mean, it's cool to see our Sarctic get more support. So I can't hate it too much. Now this card scares me, as this card allows you to add any spell in the game from your deck to your hand, all for the cost of 3 spell counters. Now, you may be thinking, but it doesn't gain spell counters like normal. It gains it off of trap and monster effects. But you have to understand that there are cards in this game that allow you to replace the need for spell counters on one card with spell counters on that card. Specifically, the Endymion Field spell allows you to use spell counters on it as if they were on the card trying to activate an effect. And there are a lot of cards that can place spell counters on things. So if you can build a deck that is built around the Endymions and allows you to go for the field spell, put spell counters on it, and also be able to end on a rank 8, you can just search any spell in the game for free. And that's just not cool. On top of that, it can also tutor for any spellcaster in the game from deck. And as if that wasn't bad enough, it also has Dingirsu protection for itself. This card is honestly one of the strongest cards in the set, but unfortunately requires so much setup that I don't know if it's going to be good anytime soon. But there is going to come a day where this card is broken and people are going to be calling for it to be banned. We've come to talking about the actual Chimera Fusion. Now, I mentioned what it does a few times. It allows you to fusion a monster using materials from your hand or field, including a beast or fiend. And during your main phase, if it's in your grave and you have Chimera on the field or in your grave, you can either add it to your hand or banish it and then summon 1 Gazelle, the King of Mythical Beasts, and 1 Baphomet from your deck or grave. Now, if you want to summon them from deck, they have to be the vanillas. But if you summon them from grave, they can be something else being treated as those cards. But I don't think any of the materials treat themselves as Gazelle or Baphomet. So unfortunately, that second effect is probably never going to happen. But the first effect, to add it back to your hand, is absolutely insane. And the fact that that is the only part of this effect that's once per turn is pretty cool too. Meaning that you can activate it, fusion summon, add it back to your hand, and then fusion summon again. So that's pretty cool. More of the Vsauce stuff, as this card can only be activated if you control Vsauce. I feel like they just keep printing field spells that require you to either control an archetypal monster or search an archetypal monster, and it is not even remotely optional, meaning that this is yet another target that you can set on your opponent's field with set rotation and then lock them out of being able to activate field spells. Which that's pretty much the only cool thing about this card. The rest of its effects kind of suck. We're not going to talk about it. Duelist Genesis, a card named after a set, making it very difficult to Google, is actually a really good card, as it only requires you to have a tuner on the field or in the grave, and then it can add any synchro spell trap from your deck to your hand. And there's some pretty cool ones, even in this set. Banishing Trap Hole is the other half of Bottomless Trap Hole, only in some ways it's worse and in some ways it's better. 1500 or less is a bit more of a niche attack stat, and unfortunately means that if your opponent has a bomb, you can't really deal with it. But the fact that it doesn't destroy means that monsters that can't be destroyed by card effects aren't immune to this card. And the fact that it banishes face down means that monsters that have effects that trigger while banished, or decks that want their cards banished, aren't going to get benefits off of it. So honestly, it's a welcome addition to the Trap Hole lineup. This card is super weird. It's like a Nibiru trap. It aims to sort of have a similar situation where it wants there to have been 10 or more cards or effects having been activated, but its actual effect isn't very good. It's cool though. I think it could maybe see some niche play depending on the format, but no, I don't think it's very good. Synchro Forceback is really cool. It's basically like Compulse for Synchro decks, but it allows you to compulse monsters up to the number of synchros you control. So you could theoretically do, upwards of like 6 cards back to your opponent's hand, which is kind of insane. We have another Tistina card. This is one of the little guys. This one summons itself if you control a light Tistina, like God or Demigod. And then you can target a Tistina or a face down, destroy it, and then add a Tistina from your deck to your hand. So it's sort of the Stratos of the deck. And it can also target like face down spells or traps to destroy them, so that's kind of neat. So might be something to consider if you're trying to splash this with other things. Hound isn't even really as good remotely. It is a free body, again, if you have a light Tistina, but the secondary effect is just not as good. Red Eyes Black Meteor Dragon is a card a lot of people have been waiting for a very long time. And it is interesting. It foolishes a normal monster as its summoning condition, which is interesting. And it also searches Red Eyes Fusion, but I mean, there's a lot of Red Eyes cards that search Red Eyes Fusion, so I don't know if this card is going to see any play for real. But we'll have to see how Red Eyes players react to this card finally being out. Magician of Faithfulness is one of those cards that they print just sort of to bait people into the nostalgia of it. This card's not very good. I mean, flip monsters in general aren't very good unless you sort of build their effects around an entire archetype like Guru or Shadow. This card in particular, though, not very good. Now we're on to the commons. Starting off the commons, we're talking about Wheel Synchron. Now, this card has a couple effects. The first is that you can treat it as a non-tuner. The second allows you to normal summon another level 4 or lower during the turn. And then the third effect allows you to reduce a synchro's level by 4. This card's not very good. If it were normal summonable without tribute, it would probably be busted, as it basically is a double summon. But as is, it's just sort of I can maybe see this card seeing play in the dedicated Synchron deck that uses Junk Speeder to summon a bunch of Synchrons, as this card would basically be a free extra normal summon in that deck. But otherwise, the setup required to get this thing out is probably not worth it. Here's another one of the Illusionist cards. This one is the discard to search one. It's similar to Mirror Knight in that it also has a graveyard effect that offers interruption. So you can discard it and add a monster that lists Chimera Fusion from your deck to your hand except itself. So you could theoretically discard it and then either search the Mirror Knight or search one of the other monsters that Mirror Knight would tutor into. And then when your opponent activates a card or effect that targets a card you control while you control Chimera, you can banish it from the grave and then negate and destroy that card. So this card offers targeting protection while also adding consistency to the deck. Definitely extremely strong in the Chimera Fusion deck. This is the second of the cards I mentioned before that sort of retrain an old dinosaur monster. And again, it has 1200 defense, which is important for later. But it's a Cyber Dragon, which is really cool. And it's a level 6, meaning it's a free level 6 body. Regardless of the fact of what else it is, being a free level 6 body can be worth it in some scenarios. And if it's normal or special summoned, you can target a monster on the field with attack lower than the total attack of all dino monsters you control and destroy it. So I think it's an interesting card to include in a deck that wants level 6s or a deck that wants dinos. It's interesting. I like it. This card is really weird and I don't really understand it. I don't think it's going to see play in the Visas deck, really any of them. You can read the effect on your own time. It's a mouthful. Here's the other of the new Nemlaria beasts. This card is honestly pretty good. You can banish 3 cards from your extra face down to summon it, just like some of the other Nemlaria beast monsters. And you can't special from the extra except pendulums. But you can send one other level 10 beast from your hand or field and then set a Nemlaria trap directly from your deck. So this also offers a bit of consistency in getting access to your traps. So that's really cool. And, you know, the art's absolutely insane. I mean, look at that guy. I mentioned before they introduced a few new evil cards. This is the new evil tile. When it's normal or special, you can special an evil tile from your hand or grave and face down defense. And then during your main phase, you can set an evo force or evo instant directly from your deck. And if a monster you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you contribute a reptile or dinosaur monster instead. The second effect to set evo force or evo instant is probably the strongest thing about this card. The fact that it requires the monster it summons off of its first effect to either be in hand or grave means that this card has pretty limited applications in that regard. But the ability to basically set one of the archetype's most powerful cards from deck is definitely something that makes it worth considering. Here's a new Evil Soar card. If it's normal or special, you can set an Evolutionary Bridge or Evo Singularity directly from your deck. And if you control this card, which was special summoned by a fire monster effect or normal summoned, you can send a fire, reptile, or dinosaur monster from your deck to the grave. Then you can make the type of and level of 2 face-up monsters on the field become the scent monsters. So this card allows you to set up your Xyz plays more easily, especially like the higher level ones like the 6s. It allows you to basically send a level 6 from deck and then make 2 monsters you control level 6, which is really cool. And the first effect, again, lets you set some pretty powerful cards from deck. So definitely worth considering. Here's more of the Unchained cards. This card is really cool as it summons itself from hand by destroying a fiend or a set card you control. It locks you into fiends. And if it's sent to the grave, you can set an Unchained spell trap directly from the deck. Definitely worth playing, I would think. And then you have Shiama, which can target a card you control, destroy it, and then destroy a spell trap on the field. This card doesn't have an inherent summoning condition from hand. It has to be engraved to summon itself. But it is a target to summon off of some of the other Unchained monsters when they float. And when it's in the grave, it can summon itself back. So it kind of floats, but I don't think it's as good as some of the other Unchained cards. Rescue Ace got some new cards, and I'm pretty sure both of them are common. This one lets you summon itself by banishing a Rescue Ace card from grave, and if you control another Rescue Ace monster, you can target an effect your opponent controls, change it to face down defense. That's a really strong effect. I mean, Book of Moon sees pretty heavy play right now, so that seems pretty strong. And if this card is sent to the grave, you can target one of your banished Rescue Ace, except a level 8, and special summon it. So not only does it summon itself, not only does it offer interruption, it also floats, which is pretty neat. Behemoth, the King of 100 Battles, is interesting. It can be tribute summoned using a single tribute, and if it's normal or special, you can target a tri-type monster in your grave and add it to your hand. And if you do, it loses 700 attack. And this normal summoned or set monster is unaffected by the effects of special summon monsters. And then during the end phase, it gains that 700 attack back. So this card's interesting. In like slower formats, I think it's cool. In like a cube format or a limited format, it's very interesting. But implications for the actual TCG are pretty limited. Agnemol Candle is cute. I love him. He's so adorable. Look at him. Look at him. I want to pet him, even though he's on fire. I want to pet him. If this card is added to your hand except by drawing it, you can special summon it. It's a free extender for Pyro decks, especially with the new Pyro Search card that's coming out soon. It basically means you have access to a free body. The level modulation basically doesn't mean anything. But the fact that it can summon itself when it's added means that it's probably worth playing in decks that want Pyro monsters on the field. Doomstar Ulka is interesting. It's interesting for a lot of reasons. It's sort of a hand trap. And it's a hand trap that, like, if a monster you have on the field is removed from the field, If it was removed from the field by being banished or sent to the grave, you can summon it back. Otherwise, it summons itself, which is cool. So I think it's interesting. It's a beast, which means it can be played in some of the tri-type decks. I don't think it's ever going to see any play. It's a little too niche for it to really be good in any sort of like modern deck, but it's cool for like cubes or limited play. Greedjar is hilarious. I mean, look at that face. Look at him. He is just grinning. He is grinning. It's interesting for a lot of reasons. Firstly, it excavates and then adds a card and then sends the rest to grave, which is a very powerful effect. And then it sends from extra deck to grave up to the number of special summon monsters from the extra deck your opponent controls, which is also crazy strong. This card would be busted if it wasn't for the fact that it's a flip monster. But I can see a card like this seeing play in a deck like Prediction Princess, which is a deck that got support recently, so maybe this card will see play in that deck. Click and Echo, from what I understand, is like supposed to be a reference to another card that was printed like half a decade ago or a decade ago or something like that. I don't know. But it's not very good. I mean, it summons itself back if it's used as link material, which is neat. And if it was special summoned by that effect, you have to keep your hand revealed, which sucks. So don't play this card. The Cuckoo Commanded to Croon. I love this card. It's so cute. And it also lets you cycle for card advantage, which is great. Unfortunately, that's just not good enough for the modern Yu-Gi-Oh! But look at him. He's so cute. He just wants to croon. Gaia Blaze is a generic level 7 synchro. And it can gain a second attack during the battle phase, and then at the end of the battle phase, you can like return fires from your grave back to your hand up to the number of monsters it destroyed. Unfortunately, because its effects are battle reliant, the actual implications in the TCG are very, very limited. But it is a Pyro level 7 synchro. It could maybe see play depending on what kind of thing you're looking for. If you specifically need a Pyro, if you need a Fire, if you need a level 7, if the stats line up. We'll have to see. Of course, in the grand tradition of retraining a bunch of really old monsters in this set, Grenosaurus got a retrain. Grenosaurus Giga Cannon. Grenosaurus was a rank 3, so obviously his retrain had to be a rank 4. And when your Dino monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the grave, you can detach a material, inflict 1,000. And then this card gains 1,000. And if this exceeds card is destroyed, target a card on the field, destroy it. And if you do, inflict 1,000. It's not very good. The fact of the whole Dino monster battling, it does count itself. But, you know, destroying things and dealing damage, it's just not good enough, especially on a card with this low of attack. If it had like a huge attack stat, maybe I could see people playing it as like a niche out to certain things, but it doesn't do much even going second. One of the new Synchro spell traps that was released in this set is Synchro Overtop. So this card lets you target any number of level 7 or 8 dragon synchros in the grave and summon them in defense position, but their levels become 1 and their effects are negated. Also, you can't special summon from the extra deck except synchros. I'm sorry, I thought Soul Charge was banned. Yeah, this card's just Soul Charge. And when a synchro is destroyed, you can banish it and then special Crimson Dragon from your extra deck. This is one of the cards that mentions Crimson Dragon, meaning that summoning Crimson Dragon lets you search this card. And then, assuming that you have some synchros in grave, you can just Soul Charge. And then this card also apparently lets you float into Crimson Dragon. It's crazy. This card's bonkers. I don't know if this card will see any real play, but just reading the effect, it's unbelievably strong. And then there's Synchro World on the other end of the spectrum. This card is not very good. We're just going to leave it at that. Jurassic Power is the final card in the series of cards that I've been mentioning for the dinosaurs with 1200 defense. It allows you to normal summon level 5 or higher dinos without tributing. And you can send a dino from your hand or field to the grave and add a dino with 1200 defense from your deck to your hand. I don't know if this card will see any real play. It will have to be in a situation where having a dino with 1200 defense, like there's a very specific dino with 1200 defense that you want to have at all costs. But overall, I don't think this card's going to see much play. Realm Resonance is interesting, but it's not good. Emergency, the new Rescue Ace quick play spell. You can summon a Rescue Ace from your deck in defense and then tribute a Rescue Ace you control. And then during your main phase, you can banish it from your grave and target a Rescue Ace trap in your grave and set it. So this card's insane, extremely good. It is a E-Telly and allows you to reset a trap. So the fact that it forces you to tribute as part of its first effect is mitigated by the fact that it floats in the grave. So that's pretty neat. Honestly, this card's busted. Insane. Makes me want to go buy the Rescue Ace cards. Beta Evolution Pill, All Transcendence. That is such a hard name to say. So it lets you tribute two dinos, it lets you tribute two monsters, including a dino, and then you special summon monsters. You cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck except dragon, dino, sea serpent, or worm monsters, and then you special level 5 or higher dino from your deck or extra deck with attack higher than the tributed monster's total attack. So this card's interesting. The thing that I love about this is that it can summon from extra deck, meaning that it sort of busts wide open the number of things that you can summon, and it's searchable off of a lot of cards in the dino deck, but I don't think this card's going to see any play, as if you're searching an Evolution Pill, you're searching double Evolution Pill and you're summoning UCT from deck. Over-exaggeration is bad. It's not very good, but it's a cool trick if you want to include it in a cube or something. Million Century Icy Prison. This card is very interesting. During the main phase, if a monster you control leaves the field by an opponent, you can either end the main phase or skip your opponent's next main phase 1. This card is very interesting. I mean, very interesting. I don't know if it'll see any play. I can imagine a world where this card's strong enough to see play, but the fact that it requires your opponent to do something means that it's probably not good. Aqua Chorus Round is fine, I guess. It's one of those cards that I think is only really good if you have an infinite number of turns to be able to do whatever you want, which is not something you can rely on. Scrap Iron Sacred Statue is yet another card in the list of Scrap Iron cards, and this is yet another card that lists Crimson Dragon. So it's interesting. It's Call of the Haunted for level 7 or 8 Dragon Synchro monsters, but it can also get from Banished. And it sets itself back down instead of being face up like Call of the Haunted. So it can be used over and over, which is kind of neat. Altergeist Revitalization is cool. It's basically Manifestation, except it only reborns Link monsters. But it has a secondary effect, which allows you to double summon Altergeist monsters, which is completely insane. New World Formation is a Vsauce trap, it's bad. New World Stars is a Vsauce trap, it's bad. The continuing epic of Charles is, for some reason, somebody got into Shiggy's house and took a picture. But aside from that, you reveal a Noble Arms equipped spell in your hand and then summon an Infernoble from hand or deck and then equip that card to it. Or send the revealed card to the grave. And then you can banish it from the grave and target a Charles you control, equip it with a Noble Knight monster from your hand or deck as an equip spell. That's pretty strong as it can do it from deck, but I don't know if Noble Knights needs this. I don't know. Again, I'm not an Infernoble player. Nemlaria Louvre is cool. It lets you summon a Nemlaria or a level 10 beast from hand or deck in defense position, and then it returns to the hand in the end phase, which is fine because they all sort of summon themselves. And then you can banish this card from the grave and target a face-up monster your opponent controls, and it loses 100 attack and defense for each of your cards currently banished face down. So that's neat. Not only does it tutor from deck, but it's also a battle trick. Valance Wave Master Phase is another Valance card, and it's not good. The actual interruption is just not very interesting. Not a lot to say about this card. Pearly Shirley, I don't know if this card's good. I don't know if it's good enough to be played instead of Pearly or even in addition to. I'm not a Pearly player, but just, reading it over, it seems all right. Makonko Spirit Walk is fine. I don't know if Makonkos really want traps, though. Small Scuffle would be better if it didn't also allow your opponent to summon a level 2 or lower from deck. But as is, it's alright. Split Mirror of the Underworld is Damage Condenser at home. Nobody plays Damage Condenser, so this card's bad. Zutomosaurus. While you control another dino, your opponent's monsters cannot target this card for attacks. Of course, in the year of our Lord 2023, they're still printing cards that allow you to dupe lock. And then you can target another card you control and destroy it. That may sound silly, but bear in mind, dinos have a lot of cards that want to be destroyed. So in the greater dinosaur deck, that might be good. But the fact that this card has basically no upside to it at all means that it's bad and is not going to see play. Finis Teray, Tower of the Necro World, is a level 10 zombie that summons itself if you control a level 10. And then if this card is sent to the grave, you can target a face-up card on the field. It cannot be destroyed by card effects this turn. It's interesting. I think it's really cool. I don't think it's going to see any play unless you just desperately want a free level 10 body. But it's still neat. Kleebelt, the Blade Dragon, is probably one of the most interesting cards in this set, like in terms of sort of long-term implications, as it's a generic level 7 synchro that has a really good effect on summon, allows you to destroy a card, meaning that if you can sort of synchro this on your opponent's turn, you can very easily get access to destroying a card. And it doesn't sort of wipe your own field like Black Rose Dragon does. So it's alright. And if this card on the field is destroyed, you can target a face-up monster on the field. It cannot attack until the end of your opponent's turn. The second effect's not very good, but the first effect makes it pretty worth it, in my opinion. Just as a consideration. Storage Pod is extremely bad. Not even worth talking about. Breath of the Tistina is another one of the Tistina cards. During your main phase, you can double summon a Tistina. Crazy. Then you can target a face-up monster you control, or if you control a light Tistina, you can target a face-up monster on the field instead. Change that monster to face-down defense, then add a Tistina card from your deck to your hand except itself. Now, the first effect is bonkers, and the second effect is also bonkers. And the fact that, if you control a light Tistina, it allows you to target an opponent's monster, which is pretty neat. Now, this is the card that sort of enables a lot of the crazy stuff for Limited specifically, but this card is not going to see play in the normal Tistina deck, I don't think. Daidara Bochi cannot be special summoned. You can tribute summon this by tributing a zombie you control. Gains 200 attack for every zombie you control. At the start of the main phase 1, if this card and 2 or more zombie monsters other than itself are in the grave, you can discard a card and add it back to your hand. It's not good. Stardust Worm is good. It's actually very good. But I don't know if it's going to find a home. We'll have to see. Diabolica, the Draconic General. Okay. If a fiend except itself is sent to the grave by card effect, you can special it from your hand or grave. But banish it when it leaves the field if it was in the grave. Oh. No, either way you banish it when it leaves the field. And if itself is sent to the grave, you can target a fiend in your grave and add it back to your hand. So that's kind of neat because it doesn't need to be sent from the field. It can just be sent to the grave from anywhere. So that makes it pretty good at recurring resources from the grave. But I don't think there's very many decks that need a level 8 fiend. So I don't think it's going to see play. New Super Heavy Samurai, but unfortunately the deck is so self-contained and consistent that I don't think this card's going to see any sort of play in that deck. It doesn't really belong there, in my opinion. And lastly, a new Magic Key Xyz. It's not very good. It has an interesting sort of banish effect as its final effect, which I think is interesting. But the first effect requires you to battle, which means it's bad. It is big, though. 3,000, 3,000 is a lot. So we've gotten through the discussion for the monsters in the TCG. So let's go ahead and discuss them in regards to the sneak peek. So we're back. Let's go ahead and talk about them in regards to the sneak peek. Let's start with Magicians of Bond and Unity. This card is useless in this format, as your max deck size is 30, meaning you have to send all but 5 of your cards to the grave, then have this card in hand as one of the 5 remaining. The optimal play is to play 20 cards, since the quality of cards is going to be very low, so this card would force you to be unoptimal just for a mediocre payoff. It isn't even good as a Monarch, as it can't be normal summoned. Revolution Synchron, if you pull Quebolt, is extremely powerful. Any normal summon level 4 plus this card is an instant Quebolt, and then you get it back as a level 1. You can go into an 8, but there isn't a level 8 Synchro in this set that you can go into. But it's still a free body, which is insane in this format. Nightmare Magician is a strong Monarch at best and a dead card at worst. The Battle Phase Steal is neat, but it's very situational, and since this set comes with very little in the way of generic extra deck monsters, you can't get rid of their monster you steal. Thankfully, it is a permanent steal, so it may be worth it, but the other battle effect to pop and the fact that it doesn't summon itself means that it's probably only going to be good in situations where you're probably already ahead. This card cannot be summoned. While this card can technically be summoned, it's really difficult, and it's only really good if you drew a critical mass of the cards that support it. Sort of the same as the last one. It's the only Synchro 8 in the set, but it requires a light, and it's, again, like I said before, a Synchro that can be summoned using all tuners. The fact that it treats itself as Visa Starfrost on the field is really neat. It means that a lot of the cards in this set are actually usable if you find a way to summon this thing. But unless you pull a critical mass of Vsauce cards, this card's not very good. Initially, I thought this card was bad, but after looking back through the cards that are available in this set, there's actually a decent number of 6s that this card can be used as Xyz material. So honestly, this card might actually be worth it. The negation effect is pretty neat, and it's got a pretty big attack stat. This card has no targets. This is the one situation where I think this card is broken. If you draw this card, you are at a huge advantage over other people at the tournament. This card, I think, is very much worth it if you draw a critical mass of the level 10s in this set. And there's quite a few of them, including the Testina big guys, the Nemleria beasts, and some of the zombie cards. One of the 10s in this set for the previously mentioned card that can draw, and it's pretty strong removal. It's a decent Monarch, and definitely worth playing if you pull a critical mass of the other Testina cards. Now onto the Ultras. Heat to the Fire Channeler is actually kind of interesting in this set because of the fact that there's a pretty decent number of fires. If you pull a critical mass of them, this card is extremely good. It even is good if you don't use it to tutor for other fires, as it has an in-hand effect that is actually pretty cool. This card is very situational. There's no ritual spell to summon it, but the trap means that you can actually activate its effect. The unfortunate fact is that the trap isn't activatable, meaning that you sort of have to rely on getting the trap card in the grave somehow. But there's a lot of ways to pop things you control, so I can definitely see that maybe being something to consider. If you pull Chimera Fusion, this is the fusion that you definitely need to pull alongside it because the other one requires this card to summon it. This is a strong target for Chimera Fusion. And the random hand rip is pretty awesome in this format. And the Reborn effect is pretty decent. Worth playing if you pull the Fusion and enough main deck support. You're never summoning this card. I don't think you're ever summoning this card either, but if you do summon it, it might be worth playing. This card, surprisingly, is actually kind of easy to summon, especially with the evil stuff, which can sort of set everything to level 2. I think that this card is actually an extremely powerful option. Aside from the card I mentioned before, there are a decent number of level 2s that you have in the deck that can allow you to summon this guy, so definitely worth looking out for. This card is extremely difficult to summon. Thinking about it might not be worth it, but, you know, it might be worth doing anyway if you pull a critical mass of Altergeist cards, as it gets you a free trap, and it allows you to steal an opponent's monster and treat it like an Altergeist. You cannot summon this card. This card is made better by the fact it takes Fiends, which this set has a few of thanks to the Illusionist archetype. The effects are pretty insane as well. The fact that it can add an Unchained monster means that you can tutor for some of the other Unchained cards which can summon themselves. And then it has an effect to be able to sort of summon back a Fiend and destroy a card you control, which some of the cards in this set want to be destroyed. There's an okay number of Infernoble and Noble cards in this set, so this card might be okay, but the first effect doesn't have another target. So the only thing you'd be using it for is for that second effect, which may not be worth it. This searches Almace, but otherwise is extremely situational. This technically is usable, but the situation you'd have to be in order to be able to summon this guy is so niche that it's not worth it. All right, summon off of this guy. My bad. This is the card that sort of makes Tistina tick. Only if you pull a critical mass of them, though. If you pull the Crystal God, this card becomes insane. Same with this card. This card allows you to Foolish a Tistina, and then if it's destroyed, it allows you to summon one from deck. Just the first effect makes it really strong, and if your opponent controls 3 or more face-up cards, you can summon Tistina Crystal God from deck, which is pretty insane. So definitely worth considering if you start seeing a lot of Tistina cards in your draft. Let's start with the super rares now. All of the Chimera Fusion cards are only good if you pull the Fusion spell and a critical mass of the other guys. Same goes for Baphomet, as does Mirror Sword Knight. Although this card would honestly be worth playing even if you only pull a couple of the other cards, or if you pull none of them because it's a 1900 attack beater. Mighty Dino King Rex is honestly only worth playing if you pull the other cards that support it, the card that lets you search it and the card that lets you summon it without tributing. But if you get access to those cards, even then, this card's insane. And it might even be worth playing just as like a 2-tribute Monarch, because it's honestly really strong. Malwisp doesn't have any way to proc that first effect, but the second effect is pretty strong, so it's definitely worth playing if you decide to try and play the Altergeist engine. This card's neat as it allows you to draw cards, but it's left sort of vulnerable. But if it's sent to the grave, it does allow you to Foolish, so that's pretty neat. This card requires you to go into the Synchro in order for it to be even remotely good. And if you're going into the Synchro, then you're probably already in a pretty decent position. And the second effect to float only works if you pull multiples of these, which is nearly impossible in this format. This card requires specific pulls to make it worth playing, so it's only good if you pull well. This card has decent stats and effects that could conceivably come up, so I think it's worth playing if you pull a few warriors or equip cards. This is a level 10 for Toku and is a target for the trap, so it's definitely worth playing if you pull either of those. If you play the Earth's Arctic Synchro, which is actually honestly pretty easy to summon in this format, then this card might be worth playing, but that's a very unlikely situation. It makes the deck brickier. This card is a staple. It is bonkers. This card requires the other fusion as it has a named fusion material and requires multiple illusionist cards. It does make fusion armament usable, but I don't think it's worth playing unless you pull extremely well with the Chimera Fusion stuff. While strong and branded, this card becomes busted if you pull enough Chimera Fusion support. This makes it where you can recycle your fusion for future turns or to search it again later in the turn. You would have to use your first fusion as material, which is not ideal, but you get a draw, which mitigates your lost card advantage. The Banish a Fusion card isn't as good because it cuts you off of Chimera Fusion in a format where you presumably only have one. It being a Fiend also helps with some other good cards in this set. This card is summonable, so definitely play it as it may very well come up. This set has 2 common main deck level 8s, but only one is consistently easy to summon. This set has several level 8 fusions and a level 8 synchro, but they are very difficult to summon, so odds are a rank 8 isn't going to come up. This card drastically changes deck building. It needs a fusion target to be good, but there are several targets to consider. It also recurs itself, so it is even more strong. Not to mention, most removal adds to hand, so removing fusions puts them back in the extra, meaning you can fuse for them again. This card can only be activated if you have the synchro, and even then, it's bad. This card is decent as the synchro spell traps are pretty strong, and getting a tuner in the grave is not super difficult, so definitely worth playing if you pull it. This is absurdly strong in this format. Banishing face down is the strongest way to remove something, bar none. The attack needing to be 1500 or less isn't ideal, but we can't all be bottomless. You are never activating this in this format. Removal if you control at least one synchro, and if you control multiple, this card becomes way stronger. This card is Stratos and becomes stronger in conjunction with Demigod. This can also target spell traps that are set, so it's good to cycle dead spells or traps. And for a lot of the cards in this set, you want their spells and traps in the grave in order to trigger their effects, so this card makes it where you can do that. If it wasn't for the fact that this card's an 1800 beater, this probably wouldn't even be worth playing, unless you specifically pulled enough Testino monsters to make the whole deck revolve around it. There are no normal monsters in this set, so the summoning effect is dead. It is, however, a decent tribute. The set does not have Red Eyes Fusion, though, so all of its effects are useless. They thankfully made the summon for deck part of the effect optional, so it's usable as a singleton, but being level 5 makes it nearly useless. Alright, let's talk about the commons. If this were level 4, it'd be busted. As is, it's pretty mid. Not very good for this format. This card tutors into more of the Chimera Fusion guys, and offers more interruption from the grave, but requires certain pulls to be at its best, so maybe consider it. It does have a decent defense stat, though. Absolutely play this no matter what. The fact that it can summon itself if you control nothing means that this card is absolutely insane and allows you to set up for a lot of Monarch plays. And if you pull the other Dino King stuff, it's pretty awesome. Do not play this card. Yet another level 10. Yet another of the Numlaria targets, and much like the others, it can summon itself. This card is absolutely imperative to play. So we get to the evols. The normal effect of this card is only usable if you pulled multiple of itself, which is hard in this format. It can protect monsters as its protection effect contributes itself. The second effect has no targets in this set. So it might be worth playing if you want level 2s for the E-Pearly, or if you just want to be able to sort of protect your big guys from battle. Basically forces them to attack this guy, as if they attack the big guy, it'll distribute itself to protect it. This card can send Folus as easily to make E-Pearly. Very strong if you pulled all pieces of that. This card is extremely easy to summon and enables several high rarity cards. Definitely worth playing regardless, though. It can summon itself from the grave, but it's not easy to get there. You can tribute for it, and it is strong back row removal, but it's hard to know if it's worth it. This card is only summonable if you put Emergency in the grave, and that's not necessarily guaranteed. It's another one of those cards that's really only good if you put a spell or trap in the grave that can't actually be activated and is only in the deck to enable a monster. So maybe it's worth playing. I mean, it is a 2800 meter, and can be normal summoned. So maybe it's worth it on those grounds. I think this card is definitely worth playing as it allows you to recur resources, and it's a 2700 monster that you can normal summon for only one tribute. That's absolutely bonkers, especially in this set. Worth playing 100%. It can't be searched, so you have to normal it, but that's fine. The fact that it's a tutor means that you have access to some of your synchro plays. The level modulation seems kind of pointless, but 1700 attack is nothing to scoff at. This card's busted in this format. Play it 100%. This card is broken in this format. In a format this slow, being able to go so plus off of a single card, setting up your grave, sending things from extra deck if your opponent controls like synchros or whatever, unbelievable. I highly doubt you're going to send anything from extra, but just being able to excavate from your deck and like send to the grave and add one of them to your hand, that's unbelievable. Worth playing for the high defense stat, but all of its other effects are mostly downsides in this format. I love him, and he lets you cycle. He's so good in this format. You can destroy itself to draw a card, you can discard to draw a card, or you can just draw in the end phase for free. And in a format like this, any of those cards' effects are strong. Definitely play it, 100%. Another generic level 7 synchro along with the other one. So, I mean, this card's strong in this format. The fact that it can attack twice means that it's pretty powerful at clearing fields. So, I think it's definitely worth playing. If you can make this card's bonkers. It really is. It's really strong in this format. Not the highest attack stat, but the effects and the fact that it deals a bunch of damage is honestly kind of high impact in this format. This is still Soul Charge, but it's not quite as Soul Charge as it is in the TCG. And, you know, floating into Crimson Dragon is only good if you pull Crimson Dragon, which is very high rarity. Still worth playing, though, if you pull the level 7 Synchro. So I think it's still worth it in that regard, and it's searchable within the set. This card isn't even worth playing in this format. The only reason you'd play it is to maybe try and float into Crimson Dragon, or maybe try and get that second effect off, but no, you're not doing it. The fact that this boosts monsters by 300, allows you to normal summon without tributing, and searches a dinosaur is insane. This card's bonkers. You don't even have to pull the specific other dinos that have to be searched off of it. If you have any sort of dinos, this card's insane. This card's completely unplayable in this format and in the TCG. Can't be activated, but if you want to play the big Rescue Ace guy, you have to play this card in order to be able to summon him. This card's definitely worth considering if you pull enough of the dinosaur stuff, so definitely keep it in mind. This card is one of the better battle tricks in this set, so you definitely need to be keeping an eye out for this. This card is very interesting interruption. Now, if people are familiar with this set and know that this card exists, it's not as good, but there's a lot of people that are just not going to play around this, so you definitely have to keep this in mind. Unplayable in this format. Great if you pulled K-Bolt. Also floats into Crimson Dragon, but you have to have drawn Crimson Dragon. Great if you pull the Link 4 to enable it. Also a double summon, so that's neat. And the fact that this set has a few cards that can put things in the grave means that that effect alone maybe make it worth playing. Needs other pulls to be good. Requires Vsauce, therefore bad. This card is actually really good if you pull enough of the Infernoble cards, so definitely keep an eye out to see if you pull enough of them to make this worthwhile. This can summon the beast from deck. And can also modulate your opponent's attack and defense. But the first effect is really why you play this. And it can be set off of one of the other beasts. If you have a card that can move columns, this card's okay, but no, probably not worth it. You don't have a level 1 Pearly in this set, so this card's unplayable. This card's only worth playing if you want to play the Ritual as like a hand trap type thing, but otherwise, this card's not good. This format, honestly, might be decent enough, but the fact that it lets your opponent summon too means that it's not that great, but still maybe worth considering. I mean, I mentioned this is Damage Condenser at home, and Damage Condenser at home is still strong, especially in this format, so I definitely would put this in my deck. This is a Dino for the Evo Pill and a 2 for E-Pearly, but the effects are bad, so depends on how hard you want to go for the other 2 cards. I mean, this card's just like a free body if you control a level 10, which the beasts are, and those cards are commons, along with the trap which summoned them. So I think this card's worth playing. This is honestly probably the strongest common in the set for this format specifically. It destroys a card on summon. So much in this set doesn't let you destroy your opponent's cards, so the fact that this lets you destroy a card your opponent controls is absolutely insane. And the fact that it makes it where cards can't attack is actually kind of relevant in this format, but I don't expect that to come up. Unplayable in the TCG, unplayable in this format. Get it out of here. This card's really strong if you pull a critical mass of the Testina cards. It's a double summon and allows you to search for a Testina card. So it's very strong. This card enables a lot of the Testina better effects because it counts as a light Testina while it's summoned on the field. So if you pull a critical mass of Testinas, this card's actually really strong, but it's also a level 10, which can make for some other interesting things, as it can be sent for the effect of the draw card. I think this card's worth playing, especially with the level 10 zombie that you have, and it's a level 10 itself, meaning that you can just discard it for the trade-in card. So definitely worth playing. Unplayable in this format. This card's really cool. The fact that it's a fiend and the fact that it supports fiends means that it has a lot of synergy with a lot of the cards in this set. It even triggers off being milled by Greed Jar, so this is just very strong. This card's useless in this format. This has all the same problems that I mentioned before with the other rank 8, but its effects count itself, so it's a decent option if you can make a rank 8. 3k attack is also just absolutely huge. And that's the end of it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope for those of you that are planning on going to the sneak peek that you've watched this video and you're prepared. For the people that aren't going to the sneak peek and still watch this far, you're the real MVP. Go ahead and let me know in the comments. Go ahead and comment pineapple if you made it this far into the video, or just fit the word pineapple into your comment. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you guys in the next one. That stuff.